This project is an evidence map on low-calorie sweeteners and health outcomes. Low-calorie sweeteners, also known as sugar substitute or artificial sweeteners, are ingredients added to food or beverages to provide sweetness without adding a significant amount of calories. In this project, we use evidence map to identify and summarize the results on 5 pre-defined categories of intermediate outcomes. And these outcomes are appetite outcomes, dietary intake or energy intake, body weight or body composition, glycemia outcomes, and energy sensing by the brain. So, evidence mapping is a relatively new methodology. Its purpose is to describe the quantity, design, and characteristics. In another way, we want to know what studies are out there. And the process of evidence mapping is very similar to the first step of systematic review or meta-analysis, where we start with defining search strategy. We search the database, screen abstracts, extract data from full articles, and eventually we deposit the data onto an online open public data repository called SRDR.
So the defining of our inclusion and exclusion criteria was an iterative process with input from our stakeholders. And as you see in Table 1, we focused on studies only with human subjects, as well as studies that were intervention studies and prospective cohort studies. And as Dina mentioned, we only included FDA-approved sweeteners and those generally recognized as safe. So we ran our search in Medline to identify studies of low-calorie sweeteners and the health outcomes Dina reviewed. And if you look in Figure 1, the Medline search turned up 12,830 abstracts. And then we use an online tool called Abstractor to screen these abstracts, and that turned up 426 abstracts that met our inclusion-exclusion criteria. We also ran a supplemental search with input from our stakeholders, and when we screened those abstracts, it turned up an additional 136 articles. Lastly, we also had studies added from previous systematic reviews that were focused on body weight outcomes as well. We then used the PMIDs of these abstracts to pull the articles from PubMed, and we screened these full-text abstracts with our eligibility criteria, and this turned up 201 studies that we could use in our evidence map.
This map contains 198 randomized control trials and 3 cohort studies. The randomized control trials have more than half that are crossed over randomized control trials that have a short duration with a small sample size. 67% are done on healthy populations and 12% are on overweight or obese population. Figure 2 shows a cumulative growth chart on 5 predefined outcomes. And we can see that more studies reported energy sensing by brain, appetite, and glycemia outcomes compared to energy intake and body weight outcomes for the low-calorie sweetener studies. And Figure 3 shows the bubble plot of low-calorie sweetener studies by study duration. Each bubble represents one study, and the size of the bubble plot, the size of each bubble corresponds to the study, the sample size ratio. On Figure 4, the most studied low-calorie sweeteners are aspartame, and followed by saccharin and sucralose. So the take-home message for evidence mapping is that evidence mapping is a cost-effective method to identify and summarize a large pool of published studies, and it could also combine with a future research needs process to identify gaps as well as inform future directions.
So this evidence mapping project is being used to inform a simultaneous future research needs project. We're working through an iterative process with a stakeholder panel of diverse experts to identify and prioritize areas where future research is needed. At the beginning of this project, we recruited an interdisciplinary panel. On the lower right, you can see we tried to include academic researchers from various disciplines, food policy experts, people with food industry experience, as well as a health provider, someone to represent lay consumers, and someone from a research funding organization. As Marissa made clear earlier, The stakeholders have been involved in every step of this project. We organized a series of webinars and surveys to educate them about evidence mapping methodology, as well as to elicit feedback on our inclusion-exclusion criteria, our search strategy, and our outcomes of interest. At this point, we've drafted a list of about 20 research questions, and our next step will be to prioritize and rank them by importance with the help of our panel.
Think of evidence mapping as the first step of doing a systematic review. And evidence mapping can cover a wide variety of population of interest, intervention of interest, and exposure of interest. Compared with a systematic review, typically we need to be very focused on one or two very focused intervention or outcomes of interest. Evidence mapping can identify a wide array of different study in a broad area of research. Therefore, evidence mapping is important to inform both future primary study and systematic review.